Alex Summers stood in our marble-floored foyer, champagne flute raised, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Congratulations are in order," he announced to our gathered friends and family. "I've been promoted to Regional Director of Hayes & Associates. And the best part? My new assistant Julie Barker will be relocating with me to oversee our expansion into the European markets."
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
His eyes found mine across the room as Julie stepped forward, her hand sliding possessively onto his arm. "We'll be spending a lot of time together in Paris and London, very close quarters." I smiled back, my phone already warming in my palm where I'd activated the recording app 20 minutes earlier. What Alex didn't know was that this entire evening had been carefully orchestrated, and in exactly 30 minutes, my call to the managing partner would reveal everything I'd been documenting for the past 6 months. The result would be his complete professional and personal destruction. But let me take you back to where this all started, because the story of how I learned to destroy my husband's life begins 3 years ago, when I thought we were building our dream together. 3 years earlier, Alex and I sat in our cramped Boston apartment, takeout containers scattered across our second-hand dining table. Rain drummed against the windows of our Beacon Hill walk-up as we celebrated his acceptance into the prestigious Hayes & Associates law firm. I was fresh out of Harvard Business School, and he'd just passed the Massachusetts bar exam on his second attempt. "This is it, Claudia," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Hayes & Associates is the gateway to everything we've dreamed of. Corporate law, international clients, maybe partnership someday." His eyes sparkled with an ambition that had always attracted me to him. "We're going to build something incredible together." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? We'd been together since our sophomore year at Boston College, had weathered his law school struggles, my MBA program, and countless nights living on ramen noodles and shared dreams. "Alex Hayes Summers," he'd joke, though no relation to the founding family. "But maybe they'll adopt me when they see how brilliant I am." My role in our partnership was supposed to be behind the scenes, but crucial. With my MBA in finance and strategy, I'd help him navigate the business side of law, understand client portfolios, and build the relationships that would fast-track his career. I had connections from business school, family money that could open doors, and a strategic mind that complemented his legal brilliance. 50-50 partners, he'd say during those early months. Your business acumen, my legal expertise. We're unstoppable together. Our wedding happened 6 months after he started at Hayes & Associates. Nothing too elaborate, just a small ceremony at my family's estate in Newport. Alex insisted we keep it modest because he wanted to make his own way at the firm without appearing to rely on my family's old money connections. I admired that independence, that pride. I wore my grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress, and Alex promised in his vows that we were equal partners in all things, forever and always. I believed every word. The firm grew to love Alex quickly. He had that rare combination of charm and competence that made clients feel both confident and important. He could explain complex legal concepts without condescension, remember personal details about clients' families, and somehow make 8-hour contract negotiations feel like friendly conversations. I supported him in every way I could think of. When he needed to research international tax law for a major client, I connected him with my former professors, who were experts in the field. When Hayes & Associates was courting a pharmaceutical company, I arranged a dinner party where Alex could casually meet the CEO, who happened to be my roommate's father from business school. When he needed to understand the financial implications of a merger he was negotiating, I spent weekends creating spreadsheets and analysis that made him look like a financial genius. "You're my secret weapon," he'd whisper after particularly successful client meetings. "They think I'm just naturally brilliant at this business side. If they only knew I had a Harvard MBA wife feeding me insights." It felt good to be appreciated, to be the power behind his rising star. Alex was promoted to senior associate after just 18 months, remarkable speed in a firm where most lawyers spent 3 to 4 years at each level. Partners began inviting him to golf outings and strategy sessions usually reserved for more senior staff. We moved from our cramped apartment to a beautiful brownstone in Back Bay. Nothing too flashy, but a clear step up. Alex insisted on paying the mortgage himself, wanting to prove he could provide for us without relying on my trust fund. I respected that, though I quietly covered many of our other expenses, including the car payments, travel, and entertainment that his growing social obligations required. The first crack in our perfect partnership appeared so subtly I almost missed it. During a dinner party at our new place, Alex was telling the story of his latest victory, a complex international acquisition that had required intricate understanding of both European and American financial regulations. The breakthrough came when I realized the tax implications were completely different if we structured it as a reverse merger rather than a traditional acquisition, he explained to our rapt audience of other young lawyers and their spouses. It saved the client nearly $12 million in the first year alone. I nearly choked on my wine. The reverse merger structure had been my idea, the result of 3 days of research and financial modeling I'd done while Alex was in depositions. We'd discussed it over breakfast, and I'd walked him through the tax advantages step by step, even drawing diagrams on napkins. But as I listened to him tell the story, I wasn't mentioned at all. Not as his brilliant wife, not as his business advisor, not even as someone who'd contributed to the solution. In Alex's version, the insight had come to him during a moment of inspiration while reviewing documents alone in his office. Later that night, as we cleaned up, I brought it up gently. "That was quite a story about the reverse merger insight," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm glad our brainstorming session over breakfast was helpful." Alex paused in loading the dishwasher. "What do you mean?" "The reverse merger structure. We worked on that together, remember? I spent all weekend researching the tax implications." He straightened up, his expression shifting to something I'd never seen before. Defensive, almost irritated. "Claudia, we talked about it, sure, but the legal strategy was mine. You helped with some background research, but the actual solution came from my understanding of corporate law." I stared at him. "Alex, I literally drew you the structure on napkins. You said it was brilliant." "Look," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "I appreciate your help with the research, but there's a difference between contributing background information and developing legal strategy. I don't want you to feel bad, but what I do at the firm is pretty specialized." I felt like I'd been slapped. The reverse merger hadn't been background research. It had been the entire solution, requiring deep understanding of international tax law, corporate structure, and financial modeling. But Alex was looking at me like I was a helpful assistant who'd photocopied some documents. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." But I didn't understand. And that night, lying next to my husband, who had just erased my contribution to his biggest professional victory, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Those first 18 months at Hayes & Associates truly were magical, and I need you to understand just how extraordinary our partnership was during that golden period because it makes what came later so much more devastating. Alex wasn't exaggerating when he called me his secret weapon. While he had the legal brilliance and courtroom charisma, I brought something equally valuable, the ability to see the bigger picture, to understand how deals fit into broader market trends, and to identify opportunities that pure legal thinking might miss. The Meridian Industries acquisition was our first major triumph together. Alex had been assigned to the legal team handling what seemed like a straightforward corporate buyout worth about $40 million. But during our nightly debriefings over dinner, something struck me as odd about the financial projections. "The target company's revenue streams don't match their stated market position," I told Alex one evening, spreading the documents across our dining table. "Look at these quarterly reports from the past 3 years. They're claiming to be a regional player, but these numbers suggest they have distribution channels that could support national expansion." Alex studied the papers with the intensity he usually reserved for case law. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking your client is about to overpay by about $20 million or underpay by about $60 million, depending on how you structure this." I pulled out my laptop and started building a financial model.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
If Meridian really has the distribution network these revenue patterns suggest, they're not just buying a regional competitor, they're buying a shortcut to national market dominance. We stayed up until 3 in the morning, Alex reviewing the legal implications while I built increasingly complex financial projections. By dawn, we had uncovered something remarkable. Meridian Industries had quietly assembled a network of subsidiary companies that, when combined, gave them coast-to-coast distribution capabilities. The acquiring company thought they were buying a small fish. In reality, they were getting a sleeping giant. Alex presented our findings to the senior partners the next morning. By afternoon, they had restructured the entire deal, increasing the acquisition price to reflect Meridian's true value and adding performance clauses that would protect their client from overpaying if our analysis proved wrong. The deal closed 6 weeks later for $87 million instead of the original $40 million, and Meridian's stock price doubled within the first year as they leveraged their newly recognized distribution network. The Summers strategy, senior partner Francis Hayes called it during the firm's quarterly meeting. Alex demonstrated exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking that separates great lawyers from merely good ones. Alex glowed under the praise, and I felt equally proud. We had done something remarkable together, combining his legal expertise with my business acumen to create insights neither of us could have reached alone. That night, Alex took me to our favorite restaurant in the North End to celebrate. "This is just the beginning," he said, raising his champagne glass. "You and me, we're going to revolutionize how this firm approaches corporate law. They've never had anyone who could bridge the legal and business sides like this." The Meridian success opened doors throughout the firm. Senior partners who had previously treated Alex like a promising junior associate suddenly included him in strategy sessions and business development meetings. Client referrals increased. Alex's billing rate was raised twice in 6 months, unprecedented for someone at his level. But more importantly for our partnership, the firm began to understand that Alex's unique value lay in his ability to see deals holistically. What they didn't know was that this holistic vision came from our collaboration, from the hours we spent every evening analyzing cases from multiple angles. The Westbrook Technologies deal came next, a complex international merger that required understanding both American and European regulatory environments. Alex was assigned as junior counsel on a team of 8 lawyers, but the case was struggling. The client wanted to move quickly, but the legal team couldn't figure out how to structure the deal to satisfy regulators on both sides of the Atlantic. "What if this isn't really a regulatory problem?" I suggested one night after Alex had spent another frustrating 14-hour day in conference rooms. "What if it's a timing problem disguised as a regulatory problem?" I had been reading about European Union business cycles in my spare time, trying to understand the context of Alex's international cases. Look at the EU approval timeline. If you file during their summer recess period, you're automatically looking at a 4-month delay. But if you restructure to take advantage of their fast-track approval process for certain types of technology transfers. We worked through the weekend, Alex researching EU corporate law while I mapped out an alternative deal structure that would qualify for accelerated regulatory review. Instead of a traditional merger, we proposed a technology licensing agreement with an option to convert to full acquisition after European approval. It was more complex legally, but it cut the timeline from 18 months to 6 months and actually reduced the overall risk. Alex presented the restructured proposal on Monday morning. By Wednesday, the client had approved the new approach. By Friday, the senior partners had moved Alex from junior counsel to co-lead on the deal. The Westbrook transaction became the fastest international merger in the firm's history and generated over $2 million in legal fees. "Alex is becoming indispensable," I overheard Francis Hayes telling another partner after the Westbrook closing dinner. "He thinks like a businessman and a lawyer simultaneously. That's exactly what our international clients need." What Francis Hayes didn't know was that he was actually praising a partnership. Alex provided the legal framework and client relationships, while I supplied the business strategy and market analysis. Together, we were creating a new model for how corporate law could be practiced. Our personal life flourished alongside our professional collaboration. We moved into the brownstone in Back Bay, hosted dinner parties where Alex's colleagues would seek out my opinions on market trends, and began planning for the future we were building together. Alex talked about making partner within 5 years instead of the typical 8 to 10. I began considering whether to pursue additional credentials that would let me formalize my role in the business side of legal practice. You should think about getting your JD, Alex suggested one evening as we walked through the public garden. Not because you need it, but because it would give you more credibility with clients. You're already thinking like a corporate lawyer, you just don't have the formal training. The idea excited me. A joint MBA JD would make me uniquely qualified to bridge the business and legal worlds. We researched evening programs that would let me earn the law degree while continuing to support Alex's cases. I was accepted to Boston University's part-time JD program and planned to start the following fall. Everything seemed perfectly aligned. Alex's career was accelerating beyond our wildest expectations, our marriage was stronger than ever, and I was positioned to become an even more valuable partner as I added legal credentials to my business expertise. We were the power couple we'd always dreamed of becoming. The firm's annual retreat that spring took place at a resort in Vermont. Spouses were invited, and I looked forward to the opportunity to meet more of Alex's colleagues in a relaxed setting. It was my first real introduction to the firm's culture and hierarchy, and I wanted to make a good impression. The weekend exceeded my expectations. Partners and their spouses were genuinely interested in my background and perspectives. I found myself in fascinating conversations about market trends, regulatory changes, and the evolving nature of corporate law practice. Several partners mentioned specific cases where Alex had demonstrated unusual business insight, and I felt proud knowing that I had contributed to those successes. "Your husband is special," Marianne Hayes, Francis's wife, told me during the Saturday evening cocktail reception. Francis says Alex has a gift for seeing the business implications of legal decisions. That's rare, especially in someone so young. "We work well together," I replied, probably glowing with pride. I love being able to contribute to his success. "That's wonderful. So many legal spouses feel left out of their husbands' careers. It's lovely that you're so involved." Involved. The word struck me as slightly odd, but I didn't dwell on it. I was too happy, too confident in our partnership, too certain that Alex and I were building something extraordinary together. On Sunday morning, as we packed to leave the retreat, Alex seemed unusually energized. "This weekend was perfect," he said, folding his shirts with unusual care. "I think it really solidified my position with the senior partners. Francis pulled me aside last night and said they're considering me for the European expansion project they've been planning." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely excited. "When would it start?" "Not for another year or so, but it would mean spending significant time in London and Paris, building relationships with European firms and clients. It's exactly the kind of opportunity that leads to early partnership." European expansion. It sounded like the adventure we'd always talked about, the chance to take our collaboration to an international level. I started imagining how my business background and growing legal knowledge could contribute to establishing Hayes & Associates as a transatlantic firm. Neither of us knew that Alex had just described the framework for my own destruction. The European expansion project would indeed transform his career, but not in a way that included me. In fact, it would become the vehicle through which I learned that everything I thought I knew about our partnership was about to change forever. But for now, driving back to Boston through the brilliant New England spring morning, I felt nothing but optimism about our shared future. I had no idea that in 6 months, a brilliant blonde lawyer named Julie Barker would walk into Hayes & Associates and teach my husband that he didn't need me as a partner after all. The changes began so gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining them. It started with small things, barely noticeable shifts in Alex's behavior that I explained away because I loved him and trusted our partnership completely. The first sign appeared during what should have been a celebration. Alex had just closed the Hartwell manufacturing deal, a complex restructuring that had taken 4 months of intense negotiation.
The client saved nearly $15 million in operational costs, and Alex received a commendation letter from the managing partner.
We went to dinner at Mistral to celebrate, one of those intimate Boston restaurants where the lighting is soft and the wine list costs more than most people's rent. Alex was animated, describing the final negotiation session where he'd managed to convince 3 different parties to accept a compromise structure that satisfied everyone. The breakthrough moment came when I realized we could use a hybrid equity debt arrangement, he explained, gesturing with his wine glass. Instead of a traditional buyout, we created a performance-based transition that protected the sellers while giving the buyers the operational control they needed. I smiled and raised my glass to toast his success, but something felt off. The hybrid equity debt structure hadn't been Alex's idea. It had been mine, developed during a particularly frustrating evening 3 weeks earlier when Alex came home exhausted and discouraged because the negotiations had stalled. "What if you're thinking about this backwards?" I had suggested while we sat in our kitchen at midnight, financial documents spread across the granite countertop. Instead of trying to find a structure that makes everyone happy, what if you create a structure that makes everyone equally nervous but equally protected? I had spent the next 2 hours sketching out a framework that combined elements from 3 different types of business arrangements, creating something that was technically complex but practically elegant. Alex had been excited about the approach, calling it brilliant and exactly the kind of creative thinking that separates us from other firms. But now, describing the victory to me as if I hadn't been there when it was conceived, Alex presented the hybrid structure as his own inspiration. Not maliciously, not deliberately trying to steal credit, but simply as if the idea had emerged fully formed from his own legal expertise. "That's wonderful," I said carefully. "I'm so proud of how you developed that solution." "Thanks, babe. It really was one of those moments where everything just clicked, you know? Sometimes the best ideas come when you're alone with the problem, really able to focus." Alone with the problem. I took a sip of wine and told myself I was being oversensitive. Maybe Alex genuinely remembered the moment differently. Maybe he had internalized our collaborative process so completely that he experienced our shared insights as his own individual breakthroughs. Maybe this was just how creative partnerships worked. But the pattern repeated itself 2 weeks later. The Morris of Industries consultation was supposed to be a routine matter, a telecommunications company seeking advice on regulatory compliance for their expansion into international markets. But during my research into Morrison's business model, I discovered something interesting. They were positioned to benefit enormously from a recent change in Federal Communications Commission regulations that most companies hadn't yet recognized. "Alex," I said over breakfast, spreading Morrison's financial reports next to his coffee cup, "look at Morrison's spectrum holdings. With the new FCC rules about international bandwidth allocation, they're sitting on assets that are worth 3 times what their balance sheet shows." Alex studied the documents while eating his bagel. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Morrison doesn't just need compliance advice. They need a complete strategic repositioning to take advantage of regulatory changes that their competitors haven't figured out yet. This could transform them from a mid-sized regional player into a major national telecommunications company." We spent the weekend developing a comprehensive strategy that went far beyond legal compliance. I researched market opportunities, analyzed competitor positions, and created financial projections showing how Morrison could leverage their unexpected regulatory advantages. Alex researched the legal framework for implementing our strategic recommendations and identified potential regulatory hurdles. On Monday morning, Alex presented our findings to Morrison's executive team. By Thursday, they had signed a retainer for ongoing strategic counsel worth over $300,000, the largest single client engagement Alex had ever secured. The celebration lunch was held at the firm's private dining room, with senior partners praising Alex's visionary approach to client service. Francis Hayes made a speech about how Alex was redefining what it meant to be a corporate lawyer in the modern business environment. "Alex didn't just solve Morrison's immediate compliance questions," Francis announced to the assembled group. "He identified opportunities they didn't even know they had. That's the kind of comprehensive thinking that makes Hayes and Associates indispensable to our clients." I watched Alex accept the praise with gracious modesty, describing how he had recognized the regulatory opportunity during his initial research and developed a strategy to help Morrison capitalize on their hidden advantages. Our weekend of collaborative analysis became his individual insight. Our joint strategic framework became his innovative approach to legal practice. After lunch, as we walked back to Alex's office, I brought up the Morrison presentation gently. "That went really well," I said. "Francis seemed particularly impressed with the strategic analysis." "Thanks. It feels good when you can really help a client see the bigger picture, you know?" "Absolutely. The regulatory analysis was fascinating. I learned so much helping you research the FCC changes." Alex glanced at me with a slightly puzzled expression. "What do you mean?" "The weekend we spent developing the Morrison strategy, the FCC regulation research, the competitive analysis, the financial projections." "Oh, right." His voice carried a dismissive tone I'd never heard before. "Yeah, you did some great background research. I really appreciate you helping me gather all that information." Background research? Information gathering? As if the strategic insights that had won Morrison as a major client had been his alone, and I had simply helped him locate supporting documents. "Alex," I said, stopping in the hallway outside his office, "the regulatory opportunity was my discovery. We developed the strategic framework together." He looked at me with what I can only describe as patient condescension. "Claudia, you found some useful information about FCC regulations, but translating that into a comprehensive legal and business strategy required understanding how regulatory law intersects with corporate structure and market dynamics. That's not really background research territory." I felt like he'd slapped me. "I have an MBA from Harvard, Alex. Understanding how regulations affect market dynamics is exactly my area of expertise." "Of course, and you're brilliant at it, but there's a difference between business analysis and legal strategy. I would never minimize your contributions, but I also can't give you credit for work that required legal expertise you don't have." Legal expertise I don't have? As if my 3 years of contributing to his most successful cases had been coincidental. As if my business school training and strategic thinking had been irrelevant to our achievements. That night, I lay awake trying to understand what was happening. Was I being overly sensitive about getting credit for our collaborative work? Was I expecting too much recognition for what Alex genuinely saw as supporting research rather than strategic development? Or was something more fundamental changing in how Alex viewed our partnership? The third incident removed any doubt. The Blackstone Capital deal was the biggest opportunity of Alex's career so far, a private equity firm seeking legal counsel for a series of international acquisitions worth over $2 billion. Alex was competing against lawyers from 3 other prestigious firms for the engagement. The key to winning Blackstone's business lay in demonstrating understanding of how private equity operated in international markets. Alex had the legal expertise, but private equity was territory where my MBA training and financial analysis skills were directly relevant. I spent 2 weeks preparing for Alex's presentation to Blackstone's partners. I researched their previous acquisitions, analyzed their investment patterns, and identified the specific challenges they were likely to face in European and Asian markets. Most importantly, I discovered that Blackstone was particularly interested in technology acquisitions, and I prepared detailed analysis of how recent changes in international intellectual property law would affect their due diligence processes. "This is exactly what they need to hear," Alex said the night before his presentation, reviewing the materials we'd prepared together. "You've given me insights that none of the other firms will have. The intellectual property analysis alone is worth millions to them." The presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning. Alex was confident, prepared, and excited about the opportunity to land Blackstone as a client. Tuesday evening, everything changed. "Julie Barker is joining the Blackstone presentation team," Alex announced when he came home from work. "Francis decided we needed someone with international M&A experience, and Julie just finished handling a major cross-border acquisition in her previous firm." Julie Barker. I had heard the name mentioned around the firm recently, a lateral hire from a prestigious New York firm who was being brought in to strengthen Hayes & Associates' international capabilities.
I hadn't met her yet, but Alex had mentioned that she was incredibly impressive. Will that change your presentation? I asked.
Not change it exactly, but Julie's going to handle the international legal framework while I focus on the domestic structuring. She has extensive experience with European regulations that will really strengthen our proposal. Wednesday evening, Alex came home later than usual, energized in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. "How did the prep session go?" I asked. "Incredible! Julie really knows her stuff. She looked at our approach to the intellectual property issues and immediately saw ways to make it more sophisticated. Her suggestions for handling the European compliance questions were brilliant. Our approach, my intellectual property analysis, refined with Julie's legal expertise." Thursday evening, Alex returned home triumphant. "We got Blackstone," he announced, sweeping me into a hug. They said our presentation was the most comprehensive they'd seen. Julie was absolutely perfect. She answered their European questions with exactly the kind of detail they needed to hear. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for his success, but feeling strangely disconnected from it. "What did they say about the intellectual property analysis?" "They loved it. Julie really knew how to present those insights in a way that highlighted their strategic value. She has this gift for translating complex analysis into clear business recommendations." Julie's gift for translating my analysis into clear business recommendations. That weekend, Alex worked late both Saturday and Sunday, preparing for the first phase of the Blackstone engagement. When I asked if I could help with any research or analysis, he smiled and kissed my forehead. "Thanks, babe, but Julie and I have it covered. This is pretty technical international stuff, and Julie's experience with cross-border transactions makes it more efficient if we just work together directly." More efficient, technical, as if my contributions had been slowing him down rather than enabling his success. Sunday evening, while Alex was still at the office, I sat in our kitchen looking at the newspaper clipping from the Boston Business Journal announcing Hayes & Associates' engagement by Blackstone Capital. The article quoted Alex and Julie extensively, describing their innovative approach to international private equity law and their complementary expertise in domestic and international markets. There was no mention of the strategic analysis that had won the deal, no reference to the intellectual property insights that had impressed Blackstone's partners, no acknowledgement of the weeks of research and preparation that had made Alex's presentation possible. I wasn't expecting public credit, but I was starting to realize that I wasn't getting private credit either. In Alex's mind, our collaborative process was becoming his individual achievement, enhanced by Julie's legal expertise. I was transitioning from essential partner to helpful spouse, from strategic contributor to supportive wife. The change was subtle enough that Alex probably didn't even realize it was happening, but I was beginning to understand that my role in his career was being redefined in ways that would fundamentally alter our marriage. I just didn't know yet how much further it would go, or that Julie Barker was about to become far more than Alex's professional partner. Meeting Julie Barker in person was like encountering a perfectly crafted version of everything I wasn't. She arrived at Hayes & Associates on a crisp October morning, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told you don't belong somewhere. She was tall, probably 5'8" without heels, with that particular shade of blonde that costs a fortune to maintain. Her suit was Armani, her briefcase was Hermes, and her handshake conveyed competence without threatening anyone's masculinity. Everything about her suggested someone who had never had to fight for recognition. "You must be Claudia," she said, with a smile that managed to be both warm and assessing. "Alex has told me so much about you. It's wonderful to finally meet the woman behind his success." The woman behind his success, as if I were his campaign manager rather than his strategic partner. The changes in Alex's schedule became pronounced over the following weeks. Evenings once devoted to collaborative case analysis were increasingly occupied by strategy sessions with Julie that couldn't include me because they involved confidential client information. Weekend mornings, when Alex used to share legal puzzles over coffee, became rushed affairs where he needed to get to the office early for preparation meetings that somehow always involved just him and Julie.
You understand, right? Alex said one Saturday morning as he grabbed his briefcase. The Rothschild acquisition has so many moving parts, and Julie's experience with European securities law is crucial for getting the structure right.
The first dinner party after Julie's arrival should have been a warning. Julie arrived fashionably late, carrying expensive wine, moving through our party like she belonged there. She engaged everyone in conversations that demonstrated her expertise without seeming boastful, asking thoughtful questions that made people feel important. But it was her interaction with Alex that caught my attention. They didn't monopolize each other's time, but there was an easy synchronization between them that I recognized because it used to exist between Alex and me. When he told a story about a complex negotiation, she would add the perfect detail that made him look more brilliant. When she described a challenging case, he would ask exactly the right follow-up question to highlight her expertise. They were performing as a team, and everyone could see it. "Alex and Julie make quite a pair," said Annie St. Louis during the party. "You can tell they really understand each other's thinking." "It's so important to have that kind of intellectual partnership in legal work," she continued, "especially in international law, where you need someone who really gets the complexity." Intellectual partnership. As if the partnership Alex and I had built over 3 years had been replaced by something more sophisticated, more worthy of respect. The worst part came during dessert, when conversation turned to international corporate law challenges. Alex launched into analysis of how American lawyers needed to rethink their approach to European markets, describing insights I recognized as extensions of conversations we'd had months earlier. But as Alex developed his points, Julie seamlessly joined the discussion, adding nuances that made his observations more sophisticated. What had been my contribution to Alex's thinking became their shared intellectual framework, improved by Julie's legal expertise and international experience. I sat at my own dinner table, listening to my husband and his colleague build upon ideas that had originated in our kitchen, watching our guests nod appreciatively at insights that had once been credited to Alex and Claudia's collaboration, but were now clearly the product of Alex and Julie's partnership. After our guests left, Alex was more energized than I'd seen him in weeks. "That was fantastic," he said as we loaded the dishwasher. "The conversation about European business culture was exactly the kind of thing our clients need to hear. Julie really knows how to articulate those concepts in ways that make complex ideas accessible." Julie's ability to articulate concepts that had originated in our marriage. The pattern accelerated over the following month. Alex began working later, often not coming home until 9 or 10. When I asked about his day, he would describe complex legal challenges that he and Julie were tackling together, problems that required the kind of collaborative analysis Alex and I used to do. "Julie's working on this fascinating approach to international tax optimization," he would tell me over our increasingly brief dinners. "She's identified a framework that could save our clients millions in cross-border transactions." When I would ask follow-up questions or suggest related approaches, Alex would listen politely, but then explain why the specific legal context made my business school perspective less relevant than Julie's international law expertise. "It's not that your insights aren't valuable," he would say with condescension disguised as appreciation. "It's just that international tax law has so many technical requirements that you really need someone with Julie's background to navigate it properly." Technical requirements, as if the strategic thinking that had made Alex successful was suddenly inadequate for the sophisticated work he was doing with Julie. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving weekend. We were supposed to spend the long weekend in Newport with my family, a tradition Alex had always enjoyed. Friday morning, Alex's phone rang at 7 a.m. "Julie, what's wrong?" He was instantly alert, sitting up in bed with urgency usually reserved for family emergencies. Something about a crisis with the Amsterdam deal, regulatory requirements that had changed overnight, the need for immediate legal research and strategic response. "I have to go back to Boston," Alex said after ending the call. "There's a situation with the Rothschild acquisition that can't wait until Monday." Julie was already at the office at 7 a.m. on the day after Thanksgiving, working alone on Alex's most important case. "Can it wait until Saturday?" I asked.
We just got here, and my parents were looking forward to spending time with you. Claudia, this is a $200 million transaction. I can't let it fail because of a long weekend.
He left 2 hours later, promising to return Sunday evening. He didn't come back Sunday. He called Monday morning saying the regulatory issues were more complex than expected and he needed to stay through Tuesday. Tuesday evening, he returned triumphant. "We saved it," he announced over dinner with my parents. "Julie's international law expertise was crucial, but I think we've created an even stronger deal structure than the original." We saved it. Julie's expertise was crucial. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom next to my husband who seemed increasingly like a stranger, I finally acknowledged what I'd been avoiding for months. Alex hadn't just found a professional colleague in Julie Barker, he'd found a replacement for me, someone who could provide the intellectual partnership and strategic collaboration that had made our marriage valuable to his career, but with legal credentials that made her contributions more credible. I was being systematically erased from the professional life we'd built together, replaced by someone who could do everything I could do, but with the added advantage of being a lawyer rather than just a lawyer's wife. The new year brought changes that Alex presented as natural career evolution, but felt like systematic erasure of everything we'd built together. He was promoted to senior associate in January, faster than anyone in the firm's recent history, and with the promotion came new responsibilities that seemed designed to distance him from our collaborative process. "I'm going to be traveling more," Alex announced over breakfast on the first Monday of the new year. "The European expansion project is accelerating, and Francis wants me to spend significant time in London establishing relationships with potential partner firms." London, the city we dreamed of exploring together, now becoming a destination that excluded me entirely. "How long will you be gone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. 2 weeks this month, probably 3 weeks in February. Julie will be coordinating the London office setup, so we'll be working closely with British firms to establish the legal framework for our international practice. Julie coordinating, Alex traveling, both of them building the international practice that was supposed to be our shared adventure. The first trip lasted 18 days. Alex called every evening, but our conversations felt perfunctory, obligatory. He would describe the firms he'd visited, the partners he'd met, the legal complexities of establishing an American firm's presence in British markets. But when I asked detailed questions or suggested strategic approaches, his responses became vague. "It's really technical stuff, Claudia," he would say, "a lot of regulatory nuances that are hard to explain over the phone." Technical stuff that apparently Julie understood perfectly, since Alex's stories increasingly featured her insights, her recommendations, her solutions to the challenges they were facing together. When Alex returned from London, he seemed different, more sophisticated somehow, as if 3 weeks of international legal practice had elevated him to a level where our domestic conversations felt provincial. He brought me expensive gifts, a silk scarf from Harrods, leather gloves from Covent Garden, a vintage necklace from Knott Hill. Beautiful gifts that felt like consolation prizes for being left behind. "London was incredible," he told me over dinner. "The legal community there operates on a completely different level, much more sophisticated approach to international corporate law." "What made it different?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my growing resentment. "The integration between business strategy and legal practice. British firms don't separate those functions the way American firms do. Lawyers are expected to understand market dynamics, regulatory trends, global economic factors. It's exactly the kind of comprehensive approach we've been developing here." The comprehensive approach we'd been developing, except now it was an approach that Alex and Julie were implementing in London while I stayed home managing our domestic life. "It sounds like Julie's international experience was valuable," I said carefully. "Essential. She has relationships with British firms going back years, understands how their partnership structures work, knows the regulatory landscape intimately. I couldn't have accomplished half of what we did without her expertise." What we did? Their collaboration had become so natural that Alex didn't even realize he was excluding me from achievements that built on work we'd developed together.
The London trips became monthly routine. Alex would spend 2 to 3 weeks abroad working with Julie to establish Hayes & Associates as a transatlantic firm. Each time he returned, he seemed more distant from our life in Boston, more excited about the international opportunities that didn't include me.
Our dinner parties changed character entirely. Instead of gatherings where Alex and I entertained colleagues as a partnership, they became events where Alex described his international experiences while I played the role of supportive hostess. Julie attended most of them now, contributing stories from London that made Alex's achievements seem more impressive and my contributions less relevant. The Everythin merger is going to be our biggest international deal yet, Alex announced during a February dinner party. British and American companies collaborating on a scale that requires coordination between 3 different legal systems. How complex is the regulatory coordination? Asked Frances Hayes. Extraordinarily complex, Julie interjected smoothly, but Alex has developed an approach to multi-jurisdictional transactions that I think could become the model for international corporate law. Alex's approach, developed with Julie's expertise, for transactions that required exactly the kind of strategic analysis I had been providing for years. But now, my business school training was irrelevant because Julie brought both business expertise and legal credentials. The conversation continued around our dining table, with Alex and Julie describing challenges and solutions that showcased their collaborative brilliance. I served wine and cleared plates and contributed occasional comments that were received politely but clearly weren't needed for the real substance of the discussion. That conversation about the Everythin deal was exactly what Frances needed to hear, Alex said as we cleaned up. I think he's finally understanding how transformative this international expansion could be for the firm. Julie certainly knows how to present your work effectively, I said. Alex paused and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What do you mean? She's very good at highlighting your insights and making them sound even more impressive. Claudia, Julie's not presenting my work. We're collaborating on complex international transactions that require both of our expertise. Her contributions are just as significant as mine. Just as significant as his. More significant than mine, apparently. Of course, I said. I just meant that you two work well together. We do, Alex agreed, but his tone suggested he found my observations somehow inappropriate. Professional collaboration is different from personal support, you know. Julie and I are solving legal problems together. That's not the same as having a supportive spouse. Professional collaboration versus personal support. As if the strategic analysis and business expertise I'd contributed for 3 years had been emotional encouragement rather than intellectual partnership. The final blow came in March, when Alex announced he'd been invited to speak at an international corporate law conference in Geneva. The topic was Innovative Approaches to Transatlantic Business Law, and his presentation would showcase the methodology he and Julie had developed for multi-jurisdictional transactions. This is huge, Claudia, he said, showing me the conference invitation. Lawyers from 20 countries, major corporate clients, senior partners from the most prestigious firms in Europe and America. This could establish me as a thought leader in international corporate law. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely proud despite my growing sense of displacement. When is the conference? Next month. Julie's co-presenting with me, obviously, since the methodology is really our joint development. Obviously, because by now it was obvious that Alex's greatest professional achievements involved Julie rather than me. I'd love to come with you, I said. I've never been to Geneva, and it would be fascinating to see how international legal conferences work. Alex's expression shifted uncomfortably. It's not really a social event, babe. Very intensive, lots of technical presentations and networking with other lawyers. You'd probably be bored. I might learn something, and it would be nice to see you present your work. Our work, Alex corrected, mine and Julie's. And honestly, having spouses there changes the dynamic. These conferences are about professional relationships and strategic discussions. Personal relationships can be distracting.
Distracting. My presence would distract from Alex's professional success because I was now categorized as personal life rather than professional partner. 3 weeks later, Alex and Julie left for Geneva together. They returned 5 days later with a joint invitation to consult on a major international merger, their presentation having impressed a consortium of European firms looking for American legal expertise. The Geneva presentation opened doors we never imagined, Alex told me over dinner. Julie and I are being asked to advise on transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Julie and Alex. Their partnership had become so established that even Alex placed her name first when describing their achievements. I sat across from my husband in our beautiful Back Bay dining room, listening to him describe the professional future he was building with another woman, and finally understood that I wasn't being gradually excluded from Alex's career. I was being systematically replaced by someone who could provide everything I'd given him, plus legal credentials that made her a more valuable partner for his ambitions. The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon in April, completely by accident, in the most mundane way possible. I was at Hayes & Associates to pick up Alex for a dental appointment he'd forgotten about when I found myself alone in Julie's office with her computer still logged in and an email conversation that would shatter every assumption I'd made about my marriage. Alex was in a deposition that was running late, so Julie had offered to let me wait in her office while she grabbed coffee. Her workspace was immaculately organized, with expensive law books and framed certificates documenting her impressive credentials. But it was her computer screen that destroyed my life. The email was open in the center monitor, part of a conversation thread between Julie and Alex that had obviously been going on for weeks. The subject line read, "Restructuring Timeline, Confidential," and the preview text made my hands start shaking. Once Claudia is out of the picture professionally, we can implement the full partnership structure we discussed. I should have closed the laptop and walked away, but something deeper than curiosity, some survival instinct I didn't know I possessed, made me scroll down to read the full conversation. What I found was 6 months of planning designed to systematically remove me from Alex's professional life and replace me entirely with Julie. The earliest emails dated back to November, just 2 months after Julie had joined the firm. They started professionally enough, but by December, the tone had shifted into something more personal and infinitely more devastating. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think Claudia's involvement in your cases might be limiting your growth potential, Julie had written on December 15th. Partners at this level expect lawyers to demonstrate independent strategic thinking, not collaborative dependence on non-lawyer spouses. Alex's response had been immediate. "I've been thinking the same thing. Claudia's business background was helpful when I was starting out, but international corporate law requires expertise she simply doesn't have. I need to start positioning myself as the strategic thinker, not just the guy who implements his wife's ideas." The guy who implements his wife's ideas? As if 3 years of our collaborative success had been me using him as a mouthpiece? The January emails were worse. They contained detailed discussions of how Alex could gradually distance himself from our collaborative process without making it obvious. "The key is making the transition seem natural," Julie had written. "Focus on cases that require legal expertise Claudia can't contribute to. International regulations, cross-border compliance, European corporate law, areas where her MBA becomes irrelevant." Alex's reply made my stomach turn. Exactly. I need to develop my own reputation for strategic thinking, independent of Claudia's business analysis. The London project is perfect for this. She can't contribute to international legal work, so our collaboration becomes unnecessary. But the February emails revealed something even worse. They showed that Alex and Julie weren't just planning to work together. They were planning a future that explicitly excluded me from both Alex's career and his personal life. "I know this is complicated because of your marriage," Julie had written on February 22nd.
But we both know that your relationship with Claudia has become a professional liability. Partners need spouses who enhance their careers, not wives who compete for credit. Alex's response was devastating. Claudia doesn't understand that what worked when I was a junior associate doesn't work for someone at my level. I need a partner who brings legal expertise to our collaboration, not just business school theory. Someone who can match my professional standing. The March emails contained the most devastating revelation of all. Alex and Julie weren't just planning to work together professionally, they were planning to be together personally. After Geneva, I think we should consider making our partnership official, Alex had written on March 18th. The conference proved we're incredibly effective together, and I can't keep pretending that my marriage to Claudia makes sense for the career I'm building.
Julie's response was immediate. I've been hoping you'd realize that. We're perfect complements professionally and personally. Claudia was right for the Alex who needed help getting started, but she's wrong for the Alex who's becoming an international law expert. The April emails contained the timeline for my elimination. The Paris trip next month is the perfect opportunity, Julie had written 3 days earlier. If you announce that our international practice requires you to relocate temporarily to Europe, Claudia either has to abandon her Boston life to follow you, which makes her look clingy and dependent, or she stays here, which makes the marriage separation seem natural. Alex's response was clinical. Brilliant. Either way, we create distance that makes the eventual divorce seem inevitable rather than deliberate. And if she chooses to stay in Boston, I can present it as her choice to prioritize her own interests over supporting my career. The most recent email, sent that morning, contained the final details. Francis is announcing the permanent European office next week, Alex had written. I'll be offered the managing partner position, which requires relocating to London for at least 2 years. When I accept, Claudia will have to choose between following me to a city where she has no career prospects or staying in Boston and effectively ending our marriage. Either choice makes her look unsupportive. Julie's response was waiting in the compose window. Perfect. And once you're established in London, the divorce becomes a practical necessity rather than a personal choice. No one questions a marriage that ends due to career demands and geographic separation. I read that exchange 3 times, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. Alex wasn't just planning to end our marriage, he was engineering a scenario where I would appear to be the one destroying our relationship by refusing to sacrifice everything for his success. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me back to reality. I quickly minimized the email window and pretended to be reading a legal journal when Julie returned. Alex should be finishing up soon, she said, settling behind her desk with casual confidence. 20 minutes later, Alex appeared, apologizing for running late. He kissed my cheek automatically, the gesture so familiar and meaningless that I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. That evening, sitting across from Alex at dinner, I watched him describe his day with the same casual affection he'd shown me for 4 years, and realized that everything about our relationship had become performance. He was playing the role of devoted husband while planning my professional and personal destruction with meticulous precision. The man I've loved, supported, and collaborated with for 3 years was systematically erasing me from his life, and he was doing it so skillfully that I was supposed to believe it was my own choice. But now I knew the truth, and Alex had no idea that his wife had just discovered exactly how replaceable he thought she was. That night, I lay awake until 4 in the morning, my mind racing through everything I'd discovered and every conversation I'd misinterpreted over the past 6 months. But by dawn, my shock had crystallized into something much more dangerous. Cold, calculating fury backed by strategic thinking that Alex had trained me to use and then forgotten I possessed. If Alex and Julie wanted to play sophisticated games with my life, they were about to learn that I'd been watching them create the playbook. My first stop was a small electronics shop in Cambridge, where I paid cash for a digital recorder no bigger than a USB drive. The college-aged clerk explained how to activate voice recording with a simple button press and how to transfer files to a computer.
It's really popular with students who want to record lectures, he said helpfully. I wasn't planning to record lectures. My second purchase was a consultation with Kate Brown, a divorce attorney whose office was in Newton, far enough from Boston's legal district that I wouldn't accidentally encounter anyone from Alex's professional circle. Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, Kate explained, but that doesn't mean fault is irrelevant to asset division. If we can prove that your husband has been actively planning to undermine your financial interests or deceive you about marital assets, that affects how a judge views property distribution. What kind of proof would be necessary? I asked. Documentation, email communications, financial records, evidence of hidden assets, or deliberate deception about income. The more systematic the deception, the more it influences how courts divide property. Documentation, email communications, evidence of systematic deception. I had the beginning of all three.
I left Kate's office with a retainer agreement and a clear understanding of what I needed to prove. Alex's plan to force me into an impossible choice wasn't just personal betrayal, it was legal manipulation that could be documented and used against him. But my real preparation went deeper than legal strategy. I began keeping detailed records of Alex's schedule, his travel, his meetings with Julie, and every conversation where he minimized my contributions. I documented the dinner parties where Julie presented my insights as her own, the client situations where Alex took credit for collaborative work, and the gradual erosion of my role in his professional life. More importantly, I started rebuilding the network connections I developed during business school but had let lapse while focusing on Alex's career. I reached out to former classmates who were now working in finance, consulting, and corporate strategy roles. The response was immediate and encouraging. My Harvard MBA still carried weight, and my experience analyzing complex business transactions had given me skills that were valuable in multiple industries. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 informal job offers and 4 requests for consulting projects. The recorder became my constant companion. I activated it during every dinner conversation where Alex described his day, every phone call where I could hear his end of conversations with Julie, every social gathering where they performed their professional partnership for our friends and colleagues. The recordings were devastating. Alex's casual dismissal of my contributions, his descriptions of me as supportive but not strategic, his explanations to friends about why Julie was exactly the kind of professional partner he needed for international work, it was all captured in his own voice. 3 weeks after discovering the emails, I had compiled comprehensive evidence showing Alex's deliberate plan to eliminate me from his career and force me into a disadvantageous divorce. But I also had something else, leverage that Alex didn't know existed. My business school connections had given me access to information about Hayes & Associates' European expansion that Alex himself didn't have. Through a former classmate who worked in international legal consulting, I learned that the London office project was far more precarious than Alex realized. The firm's European partnerships were built on relationships that were more fragile than they appeared. Several key British firms were reconsidering their agreements with Hayes & Associates due to concerns about American lawyers' understanding of European business culture and regulatory requirements. More importantly, the financial projections for the London office were optimistic to the point of fantasy. The cost of maintaining American lawyers abroad, combined with the need to establish credibility in a skeptical European market, meant that the project would need to show substantial revenue within the first year or face significant cutbacks. Alex's plan to relocate to London as managing partner of a European office was built on foundations that were already cracking. He just didn't know it yet. But I knew it, and I was about to use that knowledge in ways that Alex couldn't anticipate. The irony was perfect. Alex thought he was sophisticated enough to manipulate me into accepting my own elimination from his life, but he'd forgotten that he'd spent 3 years training me to think strategically about complex business situations. He'd taught me to identify vulnerabilities in seemingly strong positions. He'd shown me how to use comprehensive analysis to create leverage in difficult negotiations. He demonstrated the importance of understanding all parties' real interests rather than their stated positions. Alex had created the perfect partner for dismantling his carefully constructed plans. He just didn't realize that partner was me. The preparation was complete.
Now I just needed to wait for Alex to make his move, confident that when he did, I'd be ready with responses he'd never see coming. Alex's announcement came on a Thursday evening in late April, delivered over dinner with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was orchestrating events rather than walking into a trap I'd spent weeks preparing. Francis made the European expansion official today, he said, cutting his salmon with precise movements. They're opening a permanent London office, and they've offered me the managing partner position. I set down my wine glass carefully, my face arranged in the expression of surprised delight that I'd practiced in the mirror. Alex, that's incredible. When would this start? September. It's a 2-year commitment initially, with the possibility of permanent relocation if the office proves successful. He paused, watching my reaction. I know it's a big change for us, but this is exactly the kind of opportunity that leads to senior partnership.
Us. As if he hadn't already decided that there would be no us in London. What would this mean for me? I asked, playing the role of supportive wife, considering how to accommodate her husband's career advancement. My JD program, my consulting projects here in Boston? Alex's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. That's the difficult part. London would be a fresh start professionally, but it would mean putting your Boston plans on hold. I know that's a lot to ask. A lot to ask. As if he were genuinely concerned about my sacrifice, rather than counting on my refusal to justify our divorce. It is a lot to ask, I agreed, but I want to support your career. Can you give me some time to think about how to make this work? Relief flickered across Alex's face. Of course, take all the time you need. This is a decision we should make together. Together. The word had lost all meaning between us, but Alex apparently felt comfortable using it to describe decisions he'd already made with Julie. Over the following weeks, Alex began what I recognized as the final phase of his campaign to isolate me from our shared life. He started describing the London opportunity to friends and colleagues in ways that subtly positioned me as the obstacle to his success. It's an incredible opportunity, he told Sebastian Hayes during a dinner party at our house, his voice carrying just the right note of conflicted excitement. The London office could transform my career, but obviously it's complicated because Claudia has her own life established here in Boston. Her own life. As if my professional goals were separate from our partnership rather than something we'd developed together. What's Claudia thinking about the move? Asked Marianne St. Louis, who had always been supportive of my career ambitions. She's being incredibly thoughtful about it, Alex replied, with a smile that managed to convey both appreciation and subtle frustration. She's built some consulting relationships here that are important to her, and she's concerned about interrupting her JD program. I completely understand her hesitation. Her hesitation, her concerns, as if I were being selfish rather than reasonable. I watched Alex perform this careful reframing with increasing skill over multiple social gatherings. He never said anything explicitly critical about my reluctance to abandon my Boston life for his London opportunity. Instead, he positioned himself as the understanding husband who was torn between career advancement and respect for his wife's independence. Claudia's always been very focused on her own professional development, he explained to Francis Hayes during a cocktail reception at the firm. It's one of the things I admire about her, but it does make these kinds of decisions more complex. Her own professional development, as if my career ambitions were competing with his rather than supporting them. The narrative was masterfully constructed. Alex appeared generous and patient, while I was gradually cast as the wife who prioritized her personal interests over her husband's extraordinary opportunity. Everyone we knew began looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and gentle disapproval, as if I were being unreasonably stubborn about a decision that should have been obvious. "You must be so proud of Alex's London offer," Annie Brown said during a charity luncheon we both attended. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity for both of you." "It's certainly exciting for Alex," I replied carefully. "Are you worried about the transition? I imagine it would be challenging to start over professionally in London." Start over professionally?
as if my business expertise and legal education would be worthless in international markets. I'm considering all the factors, I said. It's a big decision. Annie's expression shifted to the kind of concern people show when they think someone is making a mistake. Of course, but opportunities like this don't come along often, and Alex is so brilliant at international law. This could really establish him as a leader in the field. Establish him as a leader, not us as a team, but him as an individual achieving success despite the complications created by his wife's reluctance to sacrifice everything for his advancement. The isolation campaign extended beyond our social circle into professional contexts. Alex began describing our collaborative work in ways that minimized my contributions while emphasizing the limitations of having a non-lawyer spouse involved in complex legal matters. Working with Claudia taught me a lot about business analysis, he told a group of associates during a firm retreat, his tone affectionate but patronizing. But international corporate law requires expertise that goes beyond business school training. You need someone who understands regulatory frameworks across multiple jurisdictions.
Someone like Julie, who was standing beside him nodding thoughtfully as if she agreed that spousal collaboration had natural limitations in sophisticated legal practice. "It must be nice to have a wife who takes such interest in your work," said one of the junior associates. "It is," Alex agreed, "though at some point you need professional partnerships that can match the complexity of the work you're doing. Claudia's support has been invaluable, but the London office will require collaboration with lawyers who bring equivalent expertise to international transactions." Equivalent expertise, professional partnerships, everything I'd thought we had together now being redefined as amateur support that Alex had outgrown. The most painful part was watching our friends absorb this narrative without question. People who had witnessed our collaboration, who had seen my contributions to Alex's success, now accepted the story that I was a supportive spouse whose business background had been helpful during Alex's early career, but was no longer relevant to his sophisticated international practice. "It's wonderful that Alex is so understanding about your career goals," Marianne Hayes told me during a coffee meeting. "Not every husband would be so patient about his wife's reluctance to relocate for his advancement." My reluctance, my career goals that were somehow separate from our partnership. The narrative had become so established that even people who liked me genuinely believed I was being unreasonably selfish about Alex's opportunity. But what none of them knew was that I had been recording every conversation, documenting every instance where Alex positioned our collaborative work as his individual achievement, capturing every moment where he described my business expertise as inadequate for his sophisticated legal practice. The isolation campaign was working exactly as Alex and Julie had planned. Our entire social and professional circle now viewed me as the hesitant wife who might prevent Alex from achieving his full potential. They had no idea that the hesitant wife had spent weeks gathering evidence of their conspiracy and preparing responses they would never see coming. Alex thought he was isolating me from our shared life. In reality, he was documenting his own deception so thoroughly that a divorce court would have no trouble understanding exactly how he had manipulated our circumstances to justify abandoning our partnership. The false narrative was complete. Now I just needed to wait for Alex to make his final move, confident that when he did, I would be ready to reveal the truth about who was really destroying our marriage. The call came at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in early May, just as I was preparing for bed. Alex's phone rang with the urgent tone he'd programmed for overseas clients, and I watched his face transform from drowsy contentment to sharp alertness as he recognized the number. "Francis, what's wrong?" Alex sat up in bed, instantly focused in the way that only came with genuine crisis. I lay still, listening to one side of a conversation that would prove to be the most important moment of Alex's career, and the perfect setup for his complete destruction. "The Pemberton Industries deal is collapsing," Alex said after hanging up, already reaching for his clothes.
Their European acquisition just hit a regulatory wall that could kill the entire transaction. Francis needs me to fly to London immediately to see if we can salvage it. Pemberton Industries, the massive conglomerate that Hayes and Associates had been courting for over a year, whose legal business could single-handedly establish the firm's European presence, the kind of client that made careers and justified international expansions. What kind of regulatory problem? I asked, genuinely concerned despite everything I knew about Alex's betrayal. Brexit-related trade regulations that their London lawyers completely missed. Pemberton is facing potential tariffs that could cost them hundreds of millions if the acquisition proceeds as structured. They're talking about pulling out entirely unless we can find a solution. Alex was dressed and packing within 20 minutes, his movements quick and decisive. This was the kind of crisis that separated great lawyers from merely good ones, and I could see the excitement beneath his concern. If he could save the Pemberton deal, it would establish him as indispensable to Hayes and Associates' European ambitions. "Julie's meeting me at the airport," he said, kissing me quickly as he headed for the door. "She has experience with post-Brexit regulatory frameworks that could be crucial." Of course Julie was going. The woman who would replace me in Alex's life was also going to help him achieve his greatest professional victory. "How long will you be gone?" I asked. "However long it takes. This is too important to rush." 3 days later, Alex called with news that made my blood run cold.
"We did it, Claudia! We found a solution that not only saves the acquisition, but actually improves Pemberton's position in European markets." His voice carried the kind of triumph that came with genuinely extraordinary achievement. Julie's insight into European trade law was brilliant, but the breakthrough came when I realized we could restructure the acquisition as a joint venture with staged integration. The breakthrough came when he realized my husband was already rewriting history, claiming credit for what I suspected was collaborative work with Julie. "That sounds incredibly complex," I said. It was. We had to coordinate with regulators in 3 different countries and create a framework that satisfied both British and EU requirements. But the result is a structure that's actually stronger than Pemberton's original plan. Francis must be thrilled. Beyond thrilled. He's calling it the most sophisticated international transaction in the firm's history. And Pemberton is so impressed, they're giving us their entire European legal portfolio. We're talking about $50 million in legal fees over the next 5 years. $50 million. The kind of success that would make Alex's career and justify his partnership with Julie as the firm's international law experts. When Alex returned from London 3 days later, he was transformed. The confidence I'd seen growing over the past months had crystallized into something approaching arrogance. He'd saved one of the most important deals in Hayes and Associates history, and he knew it made him virtually untouchable within the firm. The celebration dinner was held at the Four Seasons, with senior partners toasting Alex's innovative approach to international regulatory challenges and his exceptional collaboration with Julie in creating solutions that exceeded client expectations. Exceptional collaboration with Julie, not with his wife, who had spent 3 years teaching him to think strategically about complex business problems, but with his professional partner who brought legal credentials to their joint work. Alex and Julie have created a new model for international corporate law, Francis Hayes announced during his speech. Their ability to navigate complex regulatory environments while maintaining client objectives is exactly what Hayes and Associates needs for European expansion. Their ability, Alex and Julie's joint expertise, which had apparently emerged fully formed without any connection to the strategic thinking Alex had developed during our collaborative partnership. After dinner, Alex was energized in a way I hadn't seen since our early days together. "This changes everything, Claudia," he said as we drove home through the empty Boston streets. "The Pemberton success proves that our approach to international law is revolutionary. Francis is fast-tracking my promotion to partner, and the London office is going to be much bigger than originally planned. Our approach. Julie's and his, not ours." "What does this mean for the London timeline?" I asked.
Accelerated. Francis wants me there by July instead of September. Pemberton wants to maintain momentum on their European expansion, and they specifically requested that Julie and I oversee their legal strategy personally. July. 3 months earlier than Alex had originally planned, which compressed the timeline for forcing me into an impossible choice about abandoning my life to follow him. But what Alex didn't know was that his greatest professional triumph had just provided me with the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy him completely. While he'd been in London saving the Pemberton deal, I'd been conducting my own research into Hayes & Associates' European expansion. My business school contacts had given me access to financial analysis that revealed the truth about the firm's international ambitions. They were built on projections that required exactly the kind of massive client success Alex had just delivered. Without the Pemberton deal, the London office would have been a bold, expensive failure. With it, Alex became the indispensable architect of Hayes & Associates' international future. He'd saved the firm's European expansion and his own career simultaneously. But he'd also created the perfect trap for himself. Because what Alex didn't realize was that his success with Pemberton had been built on strategic thinking principles I'd taught him, applied to international law problems with Julie's expertise. He was taking credit for methodologies we'd developed together, enhanced by another woman's legal knowledge. More importantly, his triumph had been so complete, so public, and so well documented that when I revealed the truth about how he'd systematically stolen credit for our collaborative work, the contrast would be devastating.
Alex had just proven that he was capable of extraordinary legal achievement when properly supported by strategic business analysis. The question everyone would ask was where that strategic thinking had come from, and why his greatest success had coincided with his decision to eliminate his wife from his professional life. The emails I documented, the systematic evidence of Alex's plan to replace me with Julie, all of it would be viewed through the lens of his greatest professional triumph. Had Alex developed revolutionary approaches to international law independently, or had he stolen methodologies from his wife and applied them with his new partner's expertise? Had his collaboration with Julie created genuinely new insights, or had it simply provided legal credentials for business strategies I'd taught him? Alex thought his success with Pemberton made him invulnerable. In reality, it had just provided the perfect context for exposing everything he'd stolen from our marriage. The greater the triumph, the more devastating the revelation would be when people learned how that triumph had been achieved. Alex had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy not just his marriage, but his entire reputation. He just didn't know it yet. The weeks following Alex's Pemberton triumphs were a masterclass in deception. He moved through our house with the confident energy of someone whose professional future was assured, making plans for London as if my participation was a foregone conclusion, while secretly arranging for our marriage to end on his terms. "I've been thinking about the London transition," Alex said over breakfast on a Saturday morning in mid-May, his tone casual but carefully modulated. "Maybe we should approach it as a trial separation of sorts. You could stay here for the first 6 months while I get established, then evaluate whether the move makes sense for both of us. A trial separation." The phrase was designed to sound reasonable, considerate even, while actually implementing the first phase of our divorce. "That might work," I replied, buttering my toast with steady hands. "It would give me time to finish some consulting projects here before making such a big change." Relief flickered across Alex's face. "Exactly. We don't need to rush into anything permanent. Better to see how the London office develops before making major life decisions." Major life decisions, like ending our marriage, which Alex had already made but was presenting as a mutually beneficial compromise. That afternoon, while Alex played golf with clients, I made my final preparations. The digital recorder went into a small jewelry box that I would carry to every important conversation. My documentation files were uploaded to 3 separate cloud storage accounts under names Alex would never think to search. Most importantly, I prepared the call that would destroy everything Alex had built.
My contact at Pemberton Industries came through a Harvard Business School classmate who now worked in international mergers and acquisitions. Corey Barker, no relation to Julie, had been following the Hayes & Associates deal closely because his firm sometimes competed for similar clients. "Claudia, of course I remember you," Corey said during our carefully arranged phone conversation. "Your strategic analysis work was legendary in our program. What can I do for you?" "I need to understand something about the Pemberton regulatory solution," I said. "Specifically, who developed the joint venture restructuring approach that saved the deal?" "Interesting question. Why do you ask?" "Because I think the methodology might have been borrowed from previous work without proper attribution. I'm trying to determine if there are intellectual property concerns." It was a clever approach. Corey would investigate the origins of the Pemberton solution because he genuinely cared about proper attribution in professional work, not because I was seeking revenge against my husband. 3 days later, Corey called back with information that made my hands shake with anticipation. "The Pemberton restructuring methodology is fascinating," he said. "It combines European regulatory expertise with strategic business analysis in a way that's genuinely innovative. But the business strategy framework is almost identical to approaches developed by American consulting firms for domestic transactions. Someone adapted existing methodologies for international regulatory requirements. Someone had adapted existing methodologies that I had taught Alex during our collaborative work on domestic deals, now applied to international law with Julie's regulatory expertise." "Do you know who developed the original domestic framework?" I asked. "That's harder to trace. It's sophisticated strategic thinking, definitely MBA-level work, but the legal application was brilliant. Whoever handled the European regulatory integration really knew their stuff."
MBA-level strategic thinking applied with brilliant legal expertise. My business analysis, enhanced by Julie's international law knowledge, presented as Alex's revolutionary approach to corporate law. I had everything I needed. The next evening, Alex came home with champagne and the news I'd been expecting. "Francis made it official today," he announced, opening the bottle with theatrical flourish. "I'm being promoted to partner, effective immediately, the youngest partner in Hayes & Associates history." "Alex, that's incredible," I said, accepting the champagne with genuine amazement at his audacity. "What did Francis say?" "That the Pemberton success proved I have the strategic vision and international expertise to lead the firm's European expansion. He specifically mentioned my ability to combine legal knowledge with business strategy in ways that create revolutionary solutions for clients." My ability to combine legal knowledge with business strategy. Alex was being promoted to partner based on methodologies I'd taught him, applied to international law with Julie's expertise, and presented as his individual innovation. "We should celebrate properly," I said, raising my glass. "This is everything you've worked for." "Everything we've worked for," Alex corrected, though his tone suggested he was including me out of habit rather than conviction. "I couldn't have done this without your support." Support, not collaboration, not partnership, not intellectual contribution, just the kind of emotional support any devoted spouse would provide. That night, as Alex slept beside me with the satisfied exhaustion of someone whose greatest ambitions had been achieved, I lay awake, making final mental preparations for what would happen next. In less than 48 hours, Alex would make his announcement about our marriage and his relocation to London. He would position it as a difficult but necessary choice, forced by career demands and my reluctance to abandon my life in Boston. Our friends and colleagues would sympathize with both of us, while secretly believing that I was being unreasonably selfish about his extraordinary opportunity. But this time, I would be ready with responses that Alex could never anticipate. The recordings were prepared. The documentation was complete. The call to Pemberton Industries was scheduled. Most importantly, I had gathered enough evidence to prove that Alex's greatest professional triumph had been built on methodologies stolen from our marriage and applied with another woman's expertise. Alex thought he was sophisticated enough to manipulate me into accepting my own elimination from his life.
Tomorrow night, he would learn exactly how much strategic thinking he'd taught his wife during 3 years of collaboration. The student was about to become the teacher, and the lesson would destroy everything Alex thought he'd achieved. The dinner party was Alex's idea, though he presented it as a celebration, rather than what it actually was, the public announcement of our marriage's end. 24 guests gathered in our Back Bay dining room to toast his partnership and hear about the exciting future he was building in London. Julie arrived early to help with preparations, moving through our kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of someone who already considered herself part of Alex's life. She wore a navy dress that was expensive enough to signal success, but modest enough to avoid appearing presumptuous at someone else's celebration. "I brought the Rothschild champagne," she said, placing 2 bottles on our granite countertop. "Tonight deserves something special." Something special indeed. Alex had no idea that this celebration would become the scene of his complete destruction. The recorder was active in my jewelry box as guests arrived. Francis Hayes, senior partners from the firm, clients who had benefited from Alex's recent successes, and friends who had watched our marriage with what I now understood was increasing skepticism about my willingness to support Alex's international ambitions. "Before we eat," Alex announced after everyone had gathered in our living room, "I have some news to share about the next phase of my career." The room quieted with the expectation that accompanies important announcements. Alex positioned himself near the fireplace, Julie standing slightly behind him in a posture that suggested professional support rather than personal involvement. "As you know, Hayes & Associates has been expanding into European markets, and I'm proud to announce that I've been selected as managing partner of our new London office." Applause filled the room, genuine appreciation for Alex's extraordinary achievement. "The position requires relocating to London for a minimum of 2 years," Alex continued, his voice carrying just the right mixture of excitement and regret. "It's an incredible opportunity, but obviously it creates some complications for Claudia and me."
Some complications, as if the systematic destruction of our marriage was a scheduling conflict. "Claudia has built such a successful consulting practice here in Boston," Alex said, glancing at me with practiced affection. "And she's in the middle of her JD program at BU. We've decided that the most sensible approach is for me to establish the London office while she continues her important work here. After the first year, we'll evaluate whether a permanent move makes sense for both of us." A permanent move that Alex knew would never happen, because by then our marriage would be officially over, dissolved through geographic separation that appeared to be my choice. The response was exactly what Alex had orchestrated: sympathetic understanding for the difficult position we were in, admiration for Alex's career achievement, and subtle approval for his mature handling of a challenging situation. "It must be hard to be apart," said Marianne Hayes with genuine concern, "but it sounds like you're handling it in the most thoughtful way possible." "These kinds of career opportunities require sacrifices," Francis added. "It's wonderful that Claudia is supportive of Alex's advancement, even when it creates personal challenges." Supportive of Alex's advancement? Even our closest friends had absorbed the narrative that my career goals were separate from Alex's success rather than foundational to it. "Actually," I said, standing up with my champagne glass in hand, "I'd like to make an announcement of my own." The room turned toward me with polite attention. Alex's expression shifted to mild curiosity, though I caught a flicker of concern in his eyes. "I want everyone to know how proud I am of Alex's partnership and his London appointment," I began, my voice warm with what sounded like genuine admiration. "His success with the Pemberton Industries deal was truly extraordinary, and it's wonderful to see him receive the recognition he deserves." Alex relaxed slightly. This sounded like the supportive spouse speech he'd been expecting. "But I also want to share some information about how that success was achieved," I continued, reaching into my jewelry box and pulling out my phone, "because I think it's important that everyone understands the full story behind Alex's remarkable accomplishments." The room's attention sharpened. Alex's face went pale as he recognized the device in my hand.
What I'm about to play for you is a recorded conversation between Alex and Julie from 3 weeks ago, discussing the Pemberton deal. I touched the screen, and Alex's voice filled our dining room with perfect clarity. The breakthrough came when I realized we could adapt the strategic framework Claudia developed for the Morrison Industries deal to European regulatory requirements. Her business analysis methodology was exactly what we needed, but obviously we couldn't credit a non-lawyer with developing international corporate law strategy. Julie's voice responded immediately. Exactly. The strategic thinking was brilliant, but it needed legal expertise to make it credible. Perfect collaboration. Her ideas, our implementation, your credit. The silence in the room was absolute. 24 people stared at me, then at Alex, then at Julie, as the full implications of what they'd just heard settled into place. Francis Hayes found his voice first. Alex, what exactly are we listening to? But I wasn't finished. I played a second recording, this one from the week after Alex's return from London. The Pemberton success proved that Claudia's strategic methodologies work perfectly for international transactions, Alex's voice said. But I can't keep crediting her with business insights if I want to be taken seriously as an independent strategic thinker. The London office requires a managing partner who demonstrates individual expertise, not collaborative dependence. Julie's response was devastating. Don't worry, once you're established in London and the divorce is finalized, everyone will remember this as your innovation, not something you developed with your wife. The divorce is finalized. Our guests now understood that Alex's London appointment wasn't creating marital challenges, it was designed to end our marriage while making me appear responsible for choosing my career over his success. Alex stood frozen by our fireplace, his face cycling through shock, anger, and panic as he realized that his carefully constructed narrative had just been destroyed by his own words. But I still had one more recording to play, the conversation that would complete his destruction. The third recording was the one that would destroy not just Alex's marriage, but his entire career. I had saved it for last because I wanted our guests to understand the full scope of his deception before hearing the most damaging evidence. This conversation took place yesterday, I announced to the stunned room, when Alex thought I was at my book club.
Alex's voice filled our dining room again, but this time he was speaking to someone I hadn't expected, Francis Hayes himself. Francis, I need to discuss something confidential about the European expansion, Alex's recorded voice said. The strategic methodologies we've been using for international deals, they're not actually my innovation. I adapted them from frameworks my wife developed during our early collaborations. Francis's response crackled through the phone speaker. What exactly are you saying, Alex? I'm saying that the business analysis approach that saved the Pemberton deal originally came from Claudia's MBA training. I've been presenting it as my own strategic thinking, but the intellectual foundation was her work. The silence in our dining room was deafening. Every face turned toward Francis Hayes, who looked like someone had just told him his firm's greatest triumph was built on stolen methodologies. But Alex's recorded confession continued. The problem is that I can't acknowledge Claudia's contributions without undermining my credibility as an independent strategic thinker. The London office needs a managing partner who demonstrates individual expertise, not someone who depends on his wife's business school knowledge. Francis's voice carried an edge of steel. Are you telling me that our most successful international deal was based on uncredited work by your spouse? Not uncredited exactly, Alex's voice replied. More like adapted and enhanced with proper legal expertise. Claudia provided the strategic framework, but Julie and I transformed it into sophisticated corporate law methodology. Transformed it, as if stealing my intellectual property and applying it with Julie's legal knowledge constituted legitimate innovation. Francis's response was immediate and devastating. Alex, if what you're telling me is true, we have a serious problem. The Pemberton deal was presented to our board as evidence of your individual strategic capabilities.
If those capabilities were actually collaborative work with an uncredited contributor. That's why I'm planning to handle this quietly, Alex's voice said. The London relocation provides natural separation from Claudia's influence. Once I'm established independently in Europe, the question of our collaborative history becomes irrelevant. Natural separation. As if our divorce was a professional necessity rather than personal betrayal. The recording ended, leaving our dinner party in absolute silence. 24 people who had come to celebrate Alex's success now understood that his greatest achievement had been built on systematic intellectual theft from his wife. Francis Hayes was the first to speak, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who realized his firm's reputation was at stake. Alex, in my office first thing Monday morning, we need to discuss the implications of what I just heard. Alex finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. Francis, I can explain. No, Francis cut him off. You can explain on Monday. To me, to the ethics committee, and to whoever else needs to understand how our most celebrated international deal was actually achieved. Julie, who had been standing frozen throughout the recordings, suddenly moved toward the door. I should go, she said quietly. Yes, I agreed pleasantly. You should, but before you leave, perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone how your relationship with Alex began. Julie's face went white. I don't know what you mean. I pulled out my phone again. I have emails, Julie, months of them, planning Alex's career advancement, discussing your personal relationship, coordinating the timeline for ending my marriage. Would you like me to share some of those with our guests? That won't be necessary, Francis said coldly. Julie, consider your position at Hayes & Associates under review pending a full investigation. Our guests began leaving quickly. The celebration transformed into a disaster they didn't want to witness. But before the last person departed, I had one more announcement. There's something else everyone should know, I said, my voice carrying the confidence of someone who had saved the best revelation for last. I've been in contact with Pemberton Industries. They're very interested to learn that the strategic methodology that saved their deal was developed by someone who wasn't credited in the transaction. Alex's face went ashen. What does that mean? It means, darling, that Pemberton is reconsidering their relationship with Hayes & Associates. They're concerned about working with a firm that presents uncredited intellectual property as original innovation. Bad for their corporate reputation, you understand? The room was empty now, except for Alex, Julie, Francis, and me. 3 careers hanging in the balance, and one woman who had orchestrated their complete destruction using nothing but their own words and actions.
Claudia, Alex whispered, what have you done? I smiled at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, with genuine satisfaction. I've given you exactly what you plan to give me, Alex. A choice between your professional reputation and your personal relationships. The only difference is that your choice will be made in divorce court, and mine was made in our dining room. Francis turned to leave, his expression promising consequences that would extend far beyond our marriage. Alex and Julie stood in our empty dining room, their carefully constructed future crumbling around them, finally understanding that they had underestimated the woman whose life they had tried to steal. The reversal was complete. Now came the consequences. The aftermath moved faster than even I had anticipated. By Monday afternoon, Hayes & Associates was in full crisis mode, with emergency partner meetings and frantic calls to Pemberton Industries attempting damage control that was already too late. Francis Hayes called me personally on Tuesday morning, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating a legal minefield. Claudia, I need to understand the full scope of your contributions to Alex's cases over the past 3 years, he said. The firm is conducting a comprehensive review, and we need accurate documentation of collaborative work that may have been improperly attributed. Improperly attributed? Corporate speak for the systematic intellectual theft that had built Alex's career and the firm's European expansion. I have extensive documentation, I told Francis.
financial analysis, strategic frameworks, business methodology development, all time-stamped and saved in multiple formats. Would you be willing to meet with our ethics committee as a potential consultant to help us understand which client successes involved your uncredited contributions? A consultant? Suddenly, my business expertise was valuable again, now that the firm needed to understand how deeply Alex's deception ran through their most profitable client relationships. I'd be happy to consult with the firm, I said. My rates are $1,500 per day with a minimum 10-day engagement. The silence stretched out before Francis responded. Of course, we'll have contracts prepared immediately. $15,000 to help Hayes and Associates understand how much of their recent success had been built on stolen work. The irony was perfect. The Pemberton Industries response was swift and brutal. By Wednesday, they had suspended all new legal work with Hayes and Associates pending a review of professional practices and intellectual property protocols. The $50 million in projected legal fees vanished overnight. Other clients followed quickly. Word spread through Boston's legal community that Hayes and Associates' star international lawyer had been caught claiming credit for his wife's strategic work. In a profession built on individual expertise and ethical conduct, Alex's deception was professional suicide. Julie's departure was announced Friday afternoon, described as pursuing other opportunities in the firm's internal memo, but my Harvard connections had already told me the truth. No major firm would hire her after the ethics investigation revealed her complicity in presenting stolen intellectual property as original work. Alex tried calling me repeatedly, but I let every call go to voicemail. His messages progressed from angry demands for explanation to desperate pleas for mercy to pathetic attempts at negotiation. Claudia, we need to talk about how to handle this situation, his voice said on Thursday evening. Maybe we can find a solution that protects both of our interests. Both of our interests? As if we were still partners in anything other than a divorce proceeding. Saturday morning brought the final blow, a letter from the Massachusetts Bar Association announcing a formal investigation into Alex's professional conduct. Someone, probably Francis Hayes protecting the firm's reputation, had reported the intellectual property violations to the State Ethics Board. That afternoon, Alex appeared at our front door, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 1 week. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. "Claudia, please," he said when I opened the door. "Can we talk? I know you're angry, but this is destroying everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for?" I leaned against the doorframe, studying the man who had planned to erase me from his life. I made mistakes, I know that, but the bar investigation, the client departures, the firm's reputation, this affects more than just me. Yes, I agreed. It affects everyone who trusted your representation of your own capabilities, including Pemberton Industries, who hired Hayes and Associates based on expertise you didn't actually possess.
Alex's composure finally cracked. "What do you want from me, Claudia? What will it take to make this stop?" I looked at my husband, the ambitious, charming man who had taught me that partnerships could be weapons when wielded by people without honor, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I want exactly what you plan to give me, Alex: professional destruction, personal humiliation, and the knowledge that everyone you respected now understands who you really are." "But I loved you," he whispered. "No," I said, stepping back to close the door. "You loved what I could do for your career. The moment you found someone who could do it better, love became irrelevant." I closed the door on Alex's face and on the last remnants of our marriage, finally free from a partnership that had been built on lies I'd been too naive to recognize. The consequences were accelerating beyond even my most optimistic projections. Alex's career was finished, Julie's reputation was destroyed, and Hayes and Associates was facing the kind of scandal that ended professional legacies.
Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than I had imagined. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, reviewing contracts for my rapidly expanding strategic consulting firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alex's destruction had launched the most successful period of my professional life. Hayes & Associates had become my first major client after Francis Hayes realized that hiring me as a consultant was cheaper than facing additional lawsuits from clients who discovered their legal strategies had been built on uncredited work. My 10-day engagement had stretched into a 6-month contract worth over $200,000, helping the firm identify and properly attribute collaborative work that Alex had presented as his own. The Massachusetts Bar Association's investigation had concluded with Alex's license being suspended for 18 months, not permanently revoked, but enough to end any possibility of returning to elite corporate law. The official finding cited systematic misrepresentation of intellectual property contributions and unethical collaboration practices. Julie had disappeared entirely from Boston's legal scene. My Harvard network informed me she was working at a small family law practice in Portland, Maine, handling divorce cases for middle-class clients, a dramatic fall from international corporate law to domestic relations work in a small coastal town. But the most satisfying consequence was completely unexpected. Pemberton Industries had contacted me directly after learning that I was the strategic architect behind their regulatory solution. They offered me a consulting contract worth 3 times what Alex had been paid for the legal work, specifically requesting my expertise for their continued European expansion. Ms. Summers, their CEO, had said during our video conference, "We're more interested in hiring the person who actually developed the strategic framework than the lawyers who implemented it. Would you be available for ongoing consultation on international business strategy?" Available to consult on the very type of work Alex had claimed required expertise I didn't possess. The reversal was perfect. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate Brown, my divorce attorney. "Final papers signed. You're officially free. Congratulations on the settlement." The divorce settlement had been more generous than I dared hope. Alex's destroyed career meant he had no realistic prospect of future high earnings, while my consulting business was thriving. The judge had awarded me the house, 60% of our joint assets, and spousal support that reflected Alex's previous earning capacity rather than his current unemployability. Mrs. Summers demonstrated remarkable forbearance in supporting her husband's career development, the judge had noted during our final hearing. The court finds that Mr. Summers' professional opportunities were substantially enhanced by his wife's unacknowledged contributions, and that she is entitled to compensation reflecting that reality. Unacknowledged contributions. Even the legal system had recognized what Alex had tried to erase. My Harvard MBA classmates had welcomed me back into their professional network with enthusiasm that bordered on hero worship. The story of how I'd exposed my husband's intellectual theft had become legendary in business school circles, a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting your own strategic work. "You've become the poster child for standing up to professional gaslighting," my former roommate told me over lunch at our old favorite restaurant near campus. "Half the women in our class have called me asking for your contact information. Everyone wants to hire the consultant who dismantled her husband's career using his own recordings." The consulting business was growing faster than I could manage alone. I'd hired 2 junior analysts and was considering opening a New York office to handle the increasing demand for strategic business analysis from firms that wanted to ensure their success was built on properly attributed expertise. Alex had tried contacting me once since the divorce was finalized, a pathetic email asking if I would provide a reference for his job applications. I'd forwarded his request to Kate Brown with a note, "Please respond that Mrs. Summers does not provide professional references for individuals whose careers were built on systematic intellectual property violations." I never heard from him again. The sunset painted Boston Harbor in shades of gold and crimson as I finished reviewing the Pemberton contract extension. Tomorrow, I would fly to London, the city Alex had planned to conquer with Julie, to present strategic analysis for the very expansion project that was supposed to have been his greatest triumph.
My phone showed 17 missed calls from potential clients, 5 interview requests from business publications, and an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School about intellectual property protection in professional partnerships. I'd started the year as a supporting player in someone else's success story. I was ending it as the architect of my own professional empire, built on recognition of capabilities that Alex had tried to steal and Julie had helped him hide. The man who had taught me that partnerships could be weapons had inadvertently shown me something more valuable, that the most powerful weapon in any partnership is the ability to prove your own worth independently. Alex had wanted to erase me from his story. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to write my own. 2 years after our divorce was finalized, Alex appeared at my office reception desk on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. My assistant, Annie Hayes, no relation to the law firm, buzzed my intercom with barely concealed amusement. "Claudia, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's Alex Summers and that you used to be married. He looks rough." Through my office window, I could see Alex in the waiting area, and Annie's description was accurate. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that didn't quite fit. His once perfect haircut was grown out and unkempt. Most telling, his confident posture had collapsed into the defeated slouch of someone whose professional identity had been completely destroyed. "Send him in," I said, curious about what desperation had driven him to seek me out after 2 years of silence. Alex entered my corner office like a man walking to his execution, his eyes taking in the obvious signs of my success: the harbor view, the expensive furniture, the framed certificates documenting my consulting achievements that covered one entire wall. "Hello, Claudia," he said quietly. "Thank you for seeing me." "Alex," I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What brings you here?" He sat heavily, his hands shaking slightly as he placed a manila folder on my desk. "I need your help." The request was so absurd that I almost laughed. "My help? With what?" "I'm trying to get my law license reinstated. The Bar Association requires evidence of rehabilitation and professional competence before they'll consider ending my suspension." He pushed the folder toward me. "I need someone to vouch for my strategic thinking abilities, to confirm that I'm capable of practicing law ethically." I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his audacity. "You want me to provide a character reference?" "I know how it sounds, but you're the only person who can credibly speak to my legal capabilities. Everyone else knows about the intellectual property issues." "The intellectual property theft, you mean?" Alex flinched but pressed on. "Claudia, I've spent 2 years working at a document review company, making $15 an hour, sorting through discovery materials for other lawyers' cases. I'm 34 years old, and I'm living in a studio apartment in Malden because it's all I can afford." And I was hoping you might consider that I've been punished enough." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man who had once planned to steal my life and present it as his own achievement. "Alex, do you understand what you're asking me?" "I'm asking for mercy." "You're asking me to help restore the career you built by stealing my work. You want me to tell the Bar Association that you're ethically fit to practice law, despite the fact that you systematically claimed credit for intellectual property that belonged to your wife." "I've learned from my mistakes." "Have you?" I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I'd been hoping never to use. "Because I have something interesting to show you." I turned the screen toward Alex, displaying an email I'd received 3 months earlier from a legal recruiter in Chicago. This recruiter contacted me about providing strategic consulting for a mid-sized firm that was considering hiring a suspended attorney with exceptional strategic thinking abilities, despite recent ethical issues. The attorney's name was Alex Summers. Alex's face went pale. "Claudia, I can explain." The recruiting firm wanted to verify that your strategic capabilities were genuine, rather than collaborative work that had been improperly attributed. They'd heard rumors about intellectual property violations, but wanted to confirm whether you possessed independent strategic thinking skills. "What did you tell them?" I told them the truth, that your strategic thinking capabilities were entirely dependent on collaborative work with uncredited partners, and that any firm hiring you should expect to provide substantial analytical support for your legal work.
Alex slumped in his chair as if I'd physically struck him. They withdrew the job offer. Yes, they did, because unlike the Massachusetts Bar Association, private firms have no obligation to give you a second chance after you've proven yourself untrustworthy. So you'll never let me rebuild my career, no matter how much I've suffered, how much I've lost? I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at Boston Harbor, where cargo ships moved slowly through the gray morning. Alex, let me ask you something. During our marriage, did you ever consider what would happen to my career if your plan to eliminate me had succeeded? That's different. How? You had options: your MBA, your family connections, your consulting skills. You weren't dependent on a professional license that could be taken away. I turned back to face him. So when you planned to destroy my professional reputation and force me into a divorce that would leave me financially disadvantaged, that was acceptable because I had options. But now that your professional reputation is destroyed and you're facing financial hardship, I should help you because you've suffered enough? Claudia, please, I'm begging you. You know what, Alex? I am going to help you. I returned to my desk and pulled out a business card. This is the contact information for a legal aid clinic that helps low-income individuals with employment law issues. They're always looking for volunteer attorneys to help people who can't afford legal representation. Alex stared at the card. Volunteer work? 2 years of volunteer work demonstrating ethical legal practice and genuine service to people who need help. Document your hours, get references from supervising attorneys, show the Bar Association that you understand what it means to use legal skills for something other than personal advancement. That wouldn't pay anything. No, it wouldn't, but it might convince the Bar Association that you've learned the difference between practicing law and exploiting legal credentials for personal gain. I stood up, making it clear the meeting was over. The choice is yours, Alex. Spend 2 more years complaining about the consequences of your own actions, or spend 2 years proving that you're capable of practicing law ethically. Alex gathered his folder and stood to leave, his shoulders sagging with the weight of dreams that had been permanently downsized. At the door, he turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Claudia, I am sorry. About everything. I know you are, I said. You're sorry you got caught, sorry you lost everything, sorry the plan didn't work. But I don't think you're sorry about what you tried to do to me. After Alex left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about second chances and the difference between consequences and punishment. I wasn't cruel enough to want Alex to suffer forever, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that suffering had taught him genuine remorse. Some partnerships end because people grow apart. Others end because one person revealed they were never really a partner at all. Alex had taught me the difference. And for that education, I was almost grateful. 5 years after that dinner party revelation that destroyed Alex's life, I stood at the podium of Harvard Business School's largest lecture hall, delivering the keynote address for their annual entrepreneurship conference. The topic was protecting intellectual property in professional partnerships, and the audience of MBA students hung on every word. The most dangerous partnerships, I told them, are the ones where your contributions become invisible, where your strategic thinking is attributed to someone else's expertise, where you become the unnamed architect of someone else's success.
In the audience, I spotted several faces I recognized from my own MBA program, now successful executives who had invited me to speak because my story had become legendary in business school curricula. The woman who had exposed systematic intellectual property theft and built a consulting empire from the ashes of her marriage. After the presentation, a young woman approached me during the reception. "Miss Summers, I'm dealing with something similar at my consulting firm. My male supervisor keeps presenting my analysis as his own insights. How do I protect myself without destroying my career?" It was a question I'd been asked hundreds of times over the past 5 years, in various forms, by women who recognized patterns in their own professional relationships that echoed my experience with Alex. Document everything, I told her. Timestamps, email threads, recorded meetings when legally permissible. And most importantly, never assume that loyalty will be reciprocated. Protect your work first, trust second. The consulting firm I'd built had grown beyond my wildest expectations, with offices in Boston, New York, and London.
My client list included Fortune 500 companies, international law firms, and government agencies seeking strategic analysis that was properly attributed and ethically developed. Hayes & Associates had become one of my most reliable revenue sources, ironically enough. Francis Hayes had rebuilt the firm's reputation by implementing strict intellectual property protocols and maintaining me as a permanent strategic consultant. The European expansion that Alex had envisioned was thriving, but under ethical leadership that credited all contributors appropriately. That evening, back in my penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor, I received an unexpected email. The sender was Alex Summers, but the address showed he was writing from a legal aid clinic in Springfield, Massachusetts. Claudia, the message read, I wanted you to know that I followed your advice. I've been volunteering at the Western Massachusetts Legal Aid Society for 3 years now, helping low-income families with housing disputes and employment law issues. The Massachusetts Bar Association has agreed to review my license reinstatement application based on my volunteer work and client references. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted you to know that you were right about finding purpose in serving others rather than serving myself. Whatever happens with my license, I've learned what it means to practice law ethically. Thank you for pointing me toward that path. I stared at the email for a long time, surprised by the genuine humility in Alex's words. This wasn't the manipulative charm or desperate pleading I'd heard during his office visit. This sounded like someone who had actually learned something from his destruction. I composed a brief reply. Alex, I'm glad you found meaningful work. Good luck with your reinstatement application. 2 weeks later, I received a follow-up email with news that Alex's law license had been restored, with conditions. He could practice law, but only in public interest work for a minimum of 5 additional years, with regular ethics monitoring and strict reporting requirements. The boy who had dreamed of conquering international corporate law was now a 40-year-old attorney helping poor families fight eviction notices. It wasn't the dramatic punishment I might have imagined during the worst days of our marriage, but it was perhaps something more valuable, genuine consequences that had led to genuine change. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. The Pemberton Industries CEO wants to schedule a call about expanding your European consulting contract. Also, Forbes wants to interview you for their Women Who Changed business issue. I looked out at Boston Harbor, where the same cargo ships moved slowly through waters that reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in Springfield, Alex was probably reviewing case files for clients who needed legal help they couldn't afford. Somewhere in Maine, Julie was handling divorce cases for middle-class families whose marriages had failed for reasons that had nothing to do with professional betrayal. And here I was, in an office that commanded one of the best views in Boston, building strategies for international corporations that valued my expertise highly enough to pay premium rates for properly attributed intellectual property. The woman who had once been the uncredited architect of her husband's success had become the recognized architect of her own empire. The strategic thinking that Alex had tried to steal and present as his own was now internationally renowned, protected by contracts and copyrights and the kind of professional reputation that couldn't be undermined by anyone else's ambition.
I'd learned that partnerships could be weapons, but I'd also learned something more important, that the most powerful weapon was the ability to succeed independently, using skills that belonged to me alone. Alex had wanted to erase me from his story and write me out of his success. Instead, he had taught me to write my own story, one where I was the protagonist rather than the supporting character. For that education, painful as it had been, I was genuinely grateful. Justice, I'd discovered, wasn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It was about building something so successful, so undeniably your own, that their betrayal became irrelevant to your story. I'd built that success, I'd written that story, and I'd done it using every strategic principle Alex had tried to steal from me, enhanced by hard-won wisdom about the difference between partnership and exploitation. The girl who had believed in equal partnerships had become a woman who knew the difference between collaboration and theft. That transformation was worth every moment of pain Alex's betrayal had caused. Some lessons can only be learned through betrayal. Some strength can only be found after you've been broken by people you trusted. Alex had intended to teach me about my own limitations. Instead, he taught me about my own power. For that, despite everything, I would always be grateful.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.